The glass doors of the church hadn't even closed yet. Phones were still raised, smiles still frozen for selfies. And right there, between the scent of expensive perfume and fresh coffee, a man in dirty clothes stepped forward. He didn't ask for money. He didn't shout. He only asked for food. The pastor looked around. Cameras, influencers, important donors. Then he made a choice. Security was called. The man was escorted out. What no one knew in that moment was that this single decision would dismantle an empire, expose a lie hidden for years, and leave a powerful man with nothing left to protect him. Because the man he humiliated would return, and when he did, everything would fall apart. Before we continue, let me ask you something important. If you believe that faith is not just about what happens on a stage, but about how we treat people when no one is applauding, then this channel is for you. Here on Heaven Walks With Us, we share stories that remind us Jesus is still walking among us today, often in the most unexpected places. So take a moment to subscribe and stay with us until the end of the story, because what you're about to hear might change the way you see kindness, authority, and the true cost of protecting an image. Now, let's go back to where it all began. The music faded slowly, the final chord echoing against glass walls and polished stone. Pastor Silas stepped down from the stage to thunderous applause. More than 1,000 people were on their feet, some crying, some lifting their hands toward the ceiling, many holding phones high, capturing the moment from the perfect angle. Silas noticed all of it. He always did. He knew which side of his face photographed better. He knew when to pause so the emotion felt real. He knew exactly how long to hold someone's hand so they felt seen. 3 years ago, this church had met in a garage with 15 plastic chairs. Now there were LED screens, imported sound systems, valet parking, and a cafe that served artisan coffee in the lobby. This was no longer a ministry. It was an institution. As Silas walked through the crowd, he distributed phrases the way a professional distributes business cards, short, precise, personal enough to feel sincere. "God spoke through you today, Pastor," an elderly woman said, gripping his wrist tightly. Silas placed his other hand gently over hers. He looked into her eyes. He lowered his voice. "It was him, sister, always him." He smiled. He had practiced that smile. Nearby, he greeted a real estate developer, a city councilman, a well-known Christian influencer. Each received just enough attention to feel important, but not enough to slow him down. Everything was under control. Then, near the glass doors at the side entrance, Silas saw someone who didn't belong. The man stood still, not hunched, not frantic like most people asking for help. His clothes were dirty, his beard untrimmed, but his posture was straight, calm, almost patient. Silas felt irritation rise in his chest. Not here, not today, not after a service like that. The man took a step forward. "Pastor," he said. His voice was steady, polite, no desperation in it. "Do you have something to eat? I don't need money, just food." Silas glanced around instinctively. Phones were still out. The lobby smelled of cologne and fresh pastries. This was not the image he had worked so hard to build. "There's a church outreach," Silas replied, keeping his tone measured. "It runs on Tuesdays." The man didn't move. "I saw people eating here," he said gently. "There is food, isn't there?" Silas felt his stomach tighten, not with compassion, but with anger. This wasn't about food. This was about control, and Silas was about to make a decision that would haunt him far longer than he could imagine. Silas took a small step closer to the man, lowering his voice, the kind of voice he used when he needed to sound compassionate, while making sure no one else felt invited into the conversation. "I understand your situation," he said, "but we have a process. We don't just give handouts after service. That creates dependency." The man looked at him quietly. "But you just preached about sharing bread," he said. It wasn't an accusation. There was no anger in his tone, but the words landed like a blade. Silas felt heat rush to his face. He glanced around again. A few people nearby had slowed their conversations. Someone was still filming. "This isn't the right time," Silas replied. "We offer structured help, real help." The man nodded slightly. "Pastor," he said, "I'm just hungry. This isn't structure, it's a body." For a brief moment, just a second, Silas hesitated. Something about the way the man spoke unsettled him. He wasn't slurred. He wasn't rehearsed. He didn't sound like someone trying to manipulate. That made it worse, because people who understood language were dangerous. Silas leaned in even closer, his smile gone now. "I work very hard to maintain this house," he said quietly. "You have no idea how much responsibility that is. I care, but I'm not going to be used." "Used?" the man repeated slowly, as if weighing the word. "That's what you see when you look at me?" Silence stretched between them. Then the man lifted his eyes, and something inside Silas froze. There was no hatred there, no resentment, only a calm awareness, as if the man were seeing past the tailored suit, past the expensive watch, past the leather-bound Bible. "You preach about feeding others," the man said softly, "but you're afraid to share." That was enough. Silas straightened up. "Security," he said, gesturing toward two men in dark suits near the lobby. They approached respectfully, practiced in removing disruptions without causing scenes. "This is God's house," Silas added, his voice now louder, more theatrical. "It's not a place for emotional manipulation." The guards placed gentle hands on the man's arms. The man didn't resist. He didn't argue. He didn't beg. As they led him toward the side door, he turned once more. "A house of God," he said quietly, "with no room for the hungry." The door closed behind him. Silas exhaled sharply, adjusted his jacket, and smiled at the onlookers. "Sometimes," he said lightly, "we have to protect the atmosphere." A few people laughed. The moment passed, or so it seemed. Silas felt a brief sense of victory. He had contained the situation, preserved order, protected the image. But as the crowd thinned, an uncomfortable stillness settled in one corner of the room. Silas turned his head. Near the photo wall of the church stood three people. Rita, the cleaning woman who came every Sunday before sunrise and never missed a service. Jonah, the elderly deacon, a construction worker who had helped build the first church with his own hands, and Mateo, the young media volunteer, phone always nearby, eyes always observant. They weren't smiling, they weren't whispering, they were looking at Silas, not with admiration, not with gratitude, with disappointment. Silas felt a chill run down his spine. They had seen everything. He walked past them as if nothing were wrong, raising his hand in a casual farewell. "See you Wednesday," he said. But the weight of their gaze followed him all the way to the parking lot. Inside his imported SUV, the smell of new leather filled the air. Silas locked the doors and rested his hands on the steering wheel, breathing unevenly. It was part of leadership, he told himself, setting boundaries, making hard decisions. So why did his stomach feel hollow? Why did the man's eyes keep returning to him, not angry, not hurt, but knowing? Gospel music began playing automatically as Silas pulled out of the lot. He turned the volume up, hoping to drown out the memory. At home, the garage lights flickered on as he parked. The house was quiet. For the first time in years, after preaching to thousands, after applause and praise, after endless affirmation, Silas felt alone. Somewhere across the city, in a dark alley, a man in dirty clothes shared a piece of bread he had found with another homeless stranger. And he smiled, as if he knew something Silas didn't yet understand. That night, Silas couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, the air conditioner humming softly, while a single thought circled his mind again and again. Why did that moment hurt so much? Silas didn't sleep. He lay on his back in the darkness, staring at the ceiling while the digital clock on the nightstand glowed red. 3:47 a.m. Beside him, Lydia lay still. Whether she was asleep or pretending, Silas couldn't tell anymore. For months now, their conversations had been reduced to schedules, finances, appearances. Nothing raw, nothing real. The man's face returned again and again, not his clothes, not his hunger, his eyes. Silas turned to his side, then to the other. The sheets twisted around his legs. He sat up, rubbed his face, his unshaven beard scraping against his palm. He reached for his phone. The church's Instagram page filled the screen. Photos from the service, perfectly lit. Comments poured in. Powerful message, Pastor. God spoke to me today. This church changed my life. 100 likes, then more. Everything looked fine. The service had been a success. The offering had broken records. So why were his hands shaking? Silas got out of bed and walked to the kitchen. The refrigerator light cast a harsh glow across his face as he grabbed a bottle of water and drank straight from it. The cold didn't help. He leaned against the counter and looked out the window. The city slept below, streetlights, empty roads, silent buildings. And then, without warning, a memory surfaced, not from tonight. From years ago, 15 years earlier. Silas was 17, standing in the back row of a large church for the first time. He wore old shorts, cheap sandals, a shirt 2 sizes too big. He had only come because his mother cleaned offices on Sundays and didn't want him home alone. People in nice clothes walked past him without looking, until one woman stopped. She glanced at him from head to toe and leaned toward her friend, whispering, but loud enough for him to hear. People like that ruin the atmosphere. Silas never forgot the heat that rushed to his face, the way his chest tightened, the urge to disappear. He stared at the floor and made a promise that day, silently, fiercely. I will never be small again. No one will ever look at me like that again. Back in the present, Silas gripped the edge of the kitchen counter. That was it. When he saw the man at the church doors, he hadn't seen hunger. He had seen that 17-year-old boy, and without realizing it, Silas had done the one thing he swore he never would. He became the person who once wounded him. The clock on the microwave read 6:58 a.m. Silas straightened his jacket and headed back to the church early, as he always did. The building was quiet, smelling faintly of wax and stale coffee. This was the hour he liked best, before the cameras, before the people, before the performance. He sat in his leather chair in the pastoral office. The Bible on his desk lay open, always to the same page, Psalm 23. He turned on his computer, 15 unread emails. The subject lines tightened his stomach. Concern. We need to talk. Urgent. One name stood out. Jonah. Silas hovered the cursor over the message but didn't open it. Not yet. He needed to think, to plan, to control the story. 3 firm knocks interrupted his thoughts. Silas's heart jumped. Come in, he said, straightening his posture, smoothing his shirt, placing the mask back on his face. The door opened slowly. Rita stepped in first, eyes red. Jonah followed, Bible worn thin under his arm. Mateo came last, phone in hand, but the screen was dark. The air in the room grew heavy. Something had begun, and Silas could feel it slipping out of his control. No one sat down. Silas gestured toward the chairs, smiling automatically. Please make yourselves comfortable. Can I get you coffee? No one moved. Rita clasped her hands together, fingers trembling. Jonah stood straight, his worn Bible pressed against his chest. Mateo kept his eyes on the floor, his phone silent in his pocket. The silence stretched. 5 seconds. 10. Finally, Jonah spoke. Pastor, we need to talk about yesterday. Silas nodded, pretending confusion. Yesterday? He said gently. The service was beautiful. God moved powerfully. That woman who shared her testimony. This isn't about the service, Jonah interrupted, his voice steady but tight. It's about the man you sent away. Rita swallowed hard. "The man who asked for food," she added softly. Silas felt irritation rise, but he kept his tone calm. "I understand how it may have looked," he said, opening his hands in a conciliatory gesture. "But you don't know the full context. That man has been here before. He doesn't want real help. He wants to create a scene." Matteo lifted his head. "Pastor," he said quietly. "He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for attention. He asked for food." Silas leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. "And I explained," he said, his voice firm now, "that we have a protocol. We have a food pantry. We have partnerships with shelters. We don't make exceptions just because someone shows up at the wrong time in the wrong place." "He wasn't demanding," Rita said, tears slipping down her cheeks. "He was respectful, and you treated him like trash." The word hit the room like concrete. Silas stood abruptly. The chair scraped loudly across the floor. "Be careful with your words," he said, his tone no longer pastoral. "You're crossing a line." Jonah stepped slightly in front of Rita, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. "Pastor," he said, breathing deeply, "we didn't come to accuse you. We came because we love this church. I helped lay the first bricks. I remember praying when we couldn't pay the electric bill. And because of that, what happened yesterday wasn't right." Silas laughed sharply. "So now you're judging me," he said, "after everything I've done?" "No one is judging," Matteo replied, barely above a whisper. "We just want to understand." Silas spread his arms wide. "I protected this house," he said. "Do you think I don't see people trying to take advantage? People who come only to ask, to drain, to manipulate?" "But he only wanted food," Rita insisted. "There was food left. The team was eating." Something inside Silas snapped. "You don't understand," he shouted, slamming his hand on the desk. "You have no idea the weight I carry, the decisions I make, the pressure to keep this place running." Jonah tried to speak, but Silas cut him off. "Don't come in here acting like some holy tribunal, trying to teach me how to be a pastor," Silas said, pointing at them. "Do you think you know more than me? Do you think God didn't call me?" The room fell silent. Jonah looked at Rita. Rita looked at Matteo. Then Jonah spoke again, calmly. "We came to ask you to do one thing," he said. "Go find that man, apologize, offer real help before this becomes something else." Silas stared at him, stunned. "Is that a threat?" "No," Rita said quickly. "We just want peace, before more people hear about this." Silas's jaw tightened. "So you already told others," he said coldly. The silence answered him. Silas felt anger boil over. "Get out," he said quietly. "Get out of my church." Rita's voice broke. "It's not your church," she said. "It's God's." The words cut deeper than any insult. Jonah gently placed his Bible on the desk. "Open. Matthew 25. "You've given us your answer," he said sadly. They turned and left. The door closed with a soft click. Silas stood alone in the office. His breathing sounded too loud in the silence. He looked down at the open Bible. "I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat." The words seemed to burn on the page. 2 days later, Tuesday afternoon, Silas returned to the church parking lot after a lunch meeting with a wealthy businessman, someone interested in a ministry partnership. The man had talked for 2 hours about how God had blessed him, about influence, about investment. $15,000 a month. Silas accepted. As he stepped out of his car, he saw him, the same man, leaning casually near the green dumpster, calm, waiting. Silas felt heat rush through his veins. "You again," he snapped. "I was clear. You're not welcome here." The man didn't move. "I didn't come to ask for anything," he said. "I came to see if you're okay." Silas laughed bitterly. "I'm doing great," he said. "My church is growing. My projects are advancing." "You lost 3 people," the man replied. Silas froze. "Rita, Jonah, Matteo," the man continued, naming them slowly. Silas felt something turn cold in his chest. "Who are you?" he demanded. The man didn't answer. Instead he said, Authority that doesn't serve rots. Then he turned and walked away. Silas stood there, trembling, not with cold, but with something he refused to name: fear. And for the first time, the empire he had built began to crack. Wednesday evening came faster than Silas expected. He arrived at the church earlier than usual, 6:15 p.m. He checked the sound system himself, tested the microphone, straightened chairs that were slightly misaligned, read through his sermon notes 3 times. Everything was normal. Everything was under control. That's what he kept telling himself. At 7 p.m., he stood on the stage, microphone in hand, lights on. The seats were empty. Not unusual, he told himself. Midweek services always filled slowly. 7:15. 2 people entered, a quiet elderly couple he didn't recognize. They sat in the back. 7:30. 1 more person, a young man, first-time visitor. 3 people, 400 seats. Silas felt his throat tighten. "Well, good evening," he began, his voice echoing too loudly in the empty room. "It's good to see you tonight. Sometimes God teaches us in small gatherings, doesn't he?" His voice faltered. As he spoke, movement outside the glass doors caught his eye. Across the sidewalk, Rita stood speaking quietly to a small group of people. Jonah was beside her, showing something on his phone. Mateo stood slightly back, recording. More people joined. 6, 10, 15. Members Silas recognized. People who used to sit in the front rows, people who lifted their hands during worship, people who smiled at him every Sunday. They stood outside. They didn't shout. They didn't protest. They just didn't come in. A silent boycott. Inside, one of the 3 attendees stood up and walked out without explanation. The remaining elderly couple exchanged uncomfortable glances. Silas's phone vibrated in his pocket. Once, twice, again. He glanced at the screen. "Pastor, we need an emergency meeting. People are questioning expenses. Is it true you remodeled your property with church money?" His hands began to shake. The elderly couple stood, gathered their things, and left quietly. Silas was alone on a stage built for thousands. Lights still on, microphone still live. Outside, the crowd grew. And Silas understood something terrifying. The narrative was no longer his. Thursday morning, Silas's phone rang 23 times before 8 a.m. He didn't answer any of them. He sat on the edge of the bed, still in pajamas, watching the screen light up and go dark. Light up, go dark. Each name felt like a blow. Lydia entered the room holding a cup of coffee. She placed it on the nightstand without looking at him. "Are you going to stay like this all day?" she asked flatly. "I need time to think," Silas said. "Thinking won't fix this," she replied. "People want to hear from you." Silas looked up at her. "And say what?" he asked. "That they're right? That I failed?" Lydia paused. "I want you to be honest," she said quietly. "For once." She turned and left the room. The phone rang again. Silas answered this time. "Pastor Silas," he said. The voice on the other end was tense. "This is Ronald from the South Congregation. I need to tell you, people met last night without you. They're talking about separating financially from the main church." Silas felt the air leave his lungs. "Who's organizing this?" he asked. "It's not one person," Ronald said. "It's a feeling." A feeling. How do you fight a feeling? Silas hung up and threw the phone onto the bed. His breathing was shallow, frantic. No, this was not happening, not because of a beggar, not because of 3 disappointed people. At 10 a.m., Silas drove back to the church, locked himself in his office, and opened a blank document on his computer. He began to write. An hour later, he called the secretary. "I want this posted everywhere," he said. "Website, social media, all leadership groups." She read the screen, her face growing pale. "Pastor, you're calling this a spiritual attack," she said. "You're saying people are being led by rebellion." "I know what I'm doing," Silas snapped. "Post it." 15 minutes later, the letter was live. A pastoral message regarding recent attacks on the work of God. Silas leaned back in his chair, relieved. He had taken control. 10 minutes later, his phone exploded. Not with support, with anger. "You're calling us rebels? What kind of anointed man expels the hungry? Where is accountability?" Silas shut the laptop. Outside his window, the parking lot filled. 30 people, then 40. Signs appeared. "The church belongs to God, not a man. Tithes are not personal income." Someone knocked on the office door hard. "Pastor," the treasurer said breathlessly, "we have a serious problem." "What now?" Silas asked, already knowing. Bank statements were leaked. The floor seemed to vanish beneath his feet. Receipts, transfers, renovation invoices, everything documented, everything traceable. And in that moment, Silas knew. The collapse had begun. Silas barely had time to breathe. His phone buzzed non-stop, messages, missed calls, voice notes he didn't dare open. He stood in the middle of his office, staring at the window as the noise outside grew louder. Chants, murmurs, anger held just below the surface. Then the door opened again. Claudio, the treasurer, stepped inside, shirt soaked with sweat, face pale. "Pastor," he said, closing the door behind him, "the statements are everywhere. Screenshots, PDFs, people are sharing them in every group." Silas felt his throat tighten. "Who leaked them?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "I don't know," Claudio replied, "but the transfers are clear. Personal account, ranch renovations, vehicle purchase." Silas shook his head slowly. "This is an attack," he muttered. "A coordinated attack." Before Claudio could answer, another man entered. Samuel, the accountant. He was in his 60s, 20 years in the church, a man Silas had trusted without question. Samuel didn't sit. "Pastor," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something." Silas looked at him and knew. "You," Silas whispered. "You did this." Samuel closed his eyes. "I didn't want to," he said, tears forming. "But the authorities came. A formal request, tax investigation. I couldn't lie." Silas stepped forward, rage rising. "You classified everything the way I told you to," Silas said. "You approved it." "I did," Samuel replied, "for 2 years. You asked me to label personal expenses as mission work. I did it, and now I won't go to prison for it." The room spun. "You betrayed me," Silas said. Samuel shook his head. "No," he said softly. "You betrayed the church when you decided God's money was yours." Samuel turned and left. Claudio followed. Silas collapsed into his chair. Outside, the crowd grew louder. Everything he had built, every sermon, every photo, every applause, was unraveling. Silas didn't leave through the front door. He slipped out the back, got into his car, and drove without direction. The city blurred past him, traffic lights, intersections, familiar streets he barely noticed. 30 minutes later, he stopped at a gas station on the edge of town. He rested his forehead against the steering wheel, breathing heavily. Then he saw him in the mirror, the man, standing near the pump. Silas locked the doors instinctively. The man didn't approach. He simply waited. Silas lowered the window a few inches. "What do you want?" Silas snapped. "I came to see if you're okay," the man said calmly. Silas laughed bitterly. "Do I look okay?" he said. "You won. Everything's gone." "I didn't come to win," the man replied. "I came to help you see." Silas slammed his hand against the wheel. "Stop pretending you care," he shouted. "You ruined my life." The man tilted his head slightly. "You're afraid?" he said. Silas froze. "Afraid of being nothing again," the man continued. "Afraid of being the boy no one wanted near." Silas's breath caught. "How do you know that?" he whispered. The man didn't answer. Instead, he said, "If you don't tell the truth, you will drag many people down with you. A leader never falls alone." The words sank deep. Silas stepped out of the car. "Who are you?" he demanded. But the man had already turned away, walking toward the street. That evening, Silas returned home. 2 suitcases stood by the door. Lydia was waiting. "I'm taking Miguel," she said, her voice steady but exhausted. "I can't stay married to someone I don't recognize." Silas dropped to his knees. "I'm still me," he pleaded. "No," Lydia said gently. "You became someone else." Miguel stood at the stairs, backpack on his shoulders, eyes wide. "Dad?" he said. Silas opened his arms. Miguel didn't move. Lydia took her son's hand, and they walked out. The door closed. Silas remained on the floor, alone in a house that suddenly felt enormous and empty. And outside, across the street, the man stood watching, not with judgment, not with pity, but with something Silas couldn't yet name, something that looked dangerously close to love. Friday morning arrived without relief. Silas sat on the bedroom floor, back against the wall, still wearing yesterday's clothes. He hadn't slept. He hadn't eaten. His phone lay face down beside him. It rang anyway. He didn't pick up. Every vibration felt like another nail sealing something shut. Finally, one call broke through. He answered without looking. "Silas," the voice said, "it's your lawyer." Silas closed his eyes. "Be direct," he said. "All accounts, personal and church, have been frozen," the lawyer continued. "There's an official investigation for misappropriation of funds and tax fraud. You need to present yourself Monday." Silas swallowed. "And the church?" he asked. "The board has called an emergency assembly," the lawyer replied. "They'll vote on your removal tomorrow." "They can't do that," Silas said weakly. "They can," the lawyer answered, "and they will." The call ended. Silas stood slowly and walked to the bathroom. He splashed water on his face and stared at the mirror. He didn't recognize the man looking back. Dark circles, unshaven beard, eyes hollow and afraid. Where was the anointed leader, the man of God? Gone. Silas grabbed his car keys and drove. He didn't know where he was going until he arrived. The ranch, the property he had remodeled using church money. He parked by the gate and stepped out, staring at the stone walls, the wooden deck, the landscaped yard. For the first time he saw it clearly. This wasn't blessing, it was theft. Every brick paid for by someone's faith, every tile funded by trust. Silas sat on the curb, burying his face in his hands. Shame washed over him, real, unavoidable shame. "Nice place," a voice said behind him. Silas didn't turn immediately. He already knew. The man stood a few steps away, hands relaxed at his sides. "Go ahead," Silas said bitterly. "Say it." The man sat down beside him. "You're at the bottom," he said gently. Silas laughed without humor. "Bottom?" he said. "I'm beneath it." "Then you're finally in the right place," the man replied. Silas looked at him, exhausted. "For what?" he asked. "To begin again." "Begin again?" Silas repeated. "With what?" The man looked at him steadily. "With the truth." Silas shook his head. "It's too late," he said. "I've lost everything, my family, my church, my freedom." "You've lost things," the man replied. "Not yourself." Silas stared at the ground. "I don't deserve another chance," he said. "I used God. I used people. I became a fraud." The man placed a hand on his shoulder. "You became a wounded man who made terrible choices," he said. "But wounded men can change." "How?" Silas asked. "How do I fix this?" "There is a way," the man said. "But it has a cost." Silas exhaled slowly. "What cost?" "You will stand in front of everyone," the man answered. "No excuses, no explanations, no blaming." Silas's chest tightened. "They'll destroy me." "Maybe," the man said. "Or maybe they'll forgive you. That part doesn't matter." Silas looked up, confused. "Then what matters?" "That you tell the truth because it's right," the man said, "not because it saves you." Silas nodded weakly. "And then?" "You return every dollar that wasn't yours," the man continued. "You sell what you must. You accept legal consequences." "I'll have nothing left," Silas whispered. "No," the man said. "You'll have no things left, but you'll finally have yourself back." Silas sat in silence, the weight of the choice pressing down on him. "What if I don't?" he asked quietly. The man gazed toward the horizon. "Then you will fall further," he said, "and you won't fall alone." Silas felt tears rise. "I'm afraid," he admitted, "afraid of being nothing again." The man squeezed his shoulder. "You're not that boy anymore," he said. He had no choice. "You do." Silas's voice trembled. "How do you know all this about me?" The man smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "Because I've known you every step of the way," he said, "even when you stopped looking for me." Silas felt his heart pound. "Will you be there?" he asked. "If I do this?" "Yes," the man replied. "I will be there." "Where?" "At the assembly," the man said, standing up. "Tomorrow." Silas turned to speak again, but the man was already walking away, disappearing among the trees. Silas remained seated, shaking. He was terrified, but for the first time in weeks he had something else, a path. Saturday afternoon. The church parking lot was full. Cars lined the street. People stood in small clusters, whispering, checking phones, exchanging screenshots and rumors. Some came angry, some came curious, some came heartbroken. Inside the sanctuary, the board sat in a semicircle on the stage. 8 men and women, papers stacked, faces tense. The chairman, Pastor Andrew, 70 years old, calm, respected, raised the gavel. "This is an extraordinary assembly," he said. "We are here to address serious allegations regarding Pastor Silas and the use of church funds." Murmurs rippled through the room. Rita raised her hand. "I want to speak," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her fingers. "Before any vote is taken," Pastor Andrew nodded. "Go ahead." Rita swallowed. "I was one of the first to question what happened," she said, "and it broke my heart. But before we decide the future of this church, I believe Silas deserves one thing, the chance to speak, even if it hurts." Jonah stood next. "I helped build this place brick by brick," he said. "Before we tear down a man, we should look him in the eyes." Mateo nodded in agreement. The chairman sighed. "Does anyone know where Pastor Silas is?" A voice came from the back of the room. "I'm here." Every head turned. Silas stepped out of the shadows. He walked down the center aisle slowly. Each step felt heavier than the last. Eyes followed him, some filled with anger, others with disappointment, a few with pity. He climbed the steps to the stage. No notes, no prepared speech, no smile. He stood behind the microphone, hands shaking. "I didn't come to defend myself," he began, his voice unsteady. "I came to confess." The room went silent. "You're right," Silas continued. "I misused church funds. I used $180,000 to remodel my personal property. I bought a luxury vehicle. I classified personal expenses as ministry work to avoid taxes." Gasps echoed. "I did it knowingly," he said, "for 2 years." Someone shouted from the crowd, "Why?" Silas looked up. "Because I was afraid," he said. "Afraid of being small again. Afraid of becoming the boy who was once humiliated in a church because he didn't belong." Tears streamed down faces across the room. "I didn't build this for God," Silas said, his voice breaking. "I built it for myself. I used your faith to protect my ego." He took a breath. "And the worst part wasn't the money. It was that when Jesus stood at our door hungry, I expelled him." Rita sobbed openly now. "What are you going to do?" Jonah asked quietly. Silas nodded. "I will sell the property. I will sell the car. I will return every dollar. I will cooperate with the investigation, and I will step down, not as a leader, not as a pastor, but as a man who needs to learn how to serve again." Pastor Andrew stood. "Do you accept the legal consequences?" "Yes." "Do you resign your pastoral role?" Silas closed his eyes. "I resign." Silence pressed in. Then a voice from the crowd. "I forgive you, Rita." "So do I," Jonah said. "So do I," Mateo added. Not everyone joined, but enough did. Silas collapsed to his knees, sobbing, not in relief, but in complete surrender. And in that moment he felt a hand rest on his shoulder. He looked up. The man stood beside him. No one else seemed to notice. "You did the right thing," the man said softly. Silas trembled. "I lost everything," he whispered. "No," the man replied. "You found the truth." Silas looked into his eyes. "Who are you?" The man knelt beside him. "I am the one you preached," he said. "The one you used, the one you turned away." The world seemed to tilt. "I am Jesus," Silas gasped. Jesus cupped his face gently. "I never left you," he said, "even when you forgot me." And then he was gone. Silas remained on his knees, broken, but no longer empty. 3 months later, Silas sat on a hard wooden bench in a courthouse. No suit, no tie, no title. He pleaded guilty. The sentence was reduced. Community service, fines, a ban from church leadership. Silas accepted it all. Weeks turned into months. He worked as a construction helper. Jonah had found him the job. Long hours, minimum pay, honest work. Then came the service hours, scrubbing floors in a public daycare, cleaning bathrooms, carrying supplies. One afternoon, a small boy stopped and stared at him. "Do you work here?" the boy asked. "I do," Silas smiled. "My mom said you used to be a pastor." Silas paused. "I clean floors now," he said. The boy grinned. "That's good." Silas returned the smile. He felt no shame, only gratitude. A year later, Silas stood in a public square, handing out meals to the homeless. No microphone, no stage. Just food and names and listening. Someone recognized him. "Aren't you the pastor who fell?" "I was," Silas replied. "Now I serve." At the end of the line, a familiar face appeared. Clean clothes this time, same eyes. "Do you have one for me?" the man asked. Silas handed him a meal, hands trembling. "You changed," the man said. "I tried," Silas replied. "You didn't try," Jesus said softly. "You did." They sat together on a bench, eating in silence. Nothing spectacular, nothing cinematic, just peace. 2 years later, Silas sat in the back row of a small neighborhood church. No one recognized him. No one cared. And for the first time in years, he worshiped without performing. Outside, sunlight warmed his face. His phone rang. It was Lydia. "Miguel wants to see you," she said. "He's proud of you." Silas closed his eyes. Tears fell. That night, Silas whispered a simple prayer. "Thank you for not leaving." He felt no voice answer, but he knew. Jesus had always been there, waiting at the door. If this story spoke to you, if it challenged something in your heart, then stay with us. Subscribe to Heaven Walks With Us, where we share stories that remind us Jesus is not found on the stage, but at the door, waiting to see how we respond. So tell us in the comments, who is the person you almost walked past this week? God bless you.